A mother of four has been missing for more than a month, and for the family of Suzanne Simpson, they were seemingly holding on to less hope she'd make a safe return. Then in a shocking statement, the couple's daughter wrote she believed her father took her mother's life in a state of rage. And within 48 hours of her stunning statement, another development in the case. Officials have now charged Suzanne Simpson's husband with her murder. 51-year-old Suzanne Simpson disappeared in early October after a reported fight with her husband of more than 2 decades, Brad Simpson. On the night of October 6th, a neighbor told police he saw the couple fighting. The neighbor told authorities he heard the arguing from his bedroom window that became louder. According to police, the neighbor saw Suzanne attempting to get away from Brad's grasp as he tried to pull her down, and the neighbor later heard screams coming from a nearby wooded area of the couple's home. Then Brad was seen getting into his pickup truck to leave their home, only to return about an hour or two later. And following that evening, Suzanne hadn't been heard from or seen since. Things started to feel suspicious when the couple's youngest child wasn't picked up from school, and the child told school staff her parents had been fighting and her father hit her mom in the face and possibly pushed her into a wall and took away her cell phone. Now the couple's 20-year-old daughter is also revealing she believes something bad happened that night and believes her father killed her mom. In a statement on social media, Brad and Suzanne's daughter Chandler wrote in part, quote, "My mom was a victim of abuse from my father. My father took my mother's life in a state of rage and control. In our community, this should not be happening, and I will not stop speaking as the voice of my mother until she is found." Suzanne Simpson was a victim of abuse and a victim of this community. Beyond being a victim, she was a phenomenal mother, hardworking, driven, loving, and kind. She went on to write, "Shame on my community for not speaking about violence. Within Alamo Heights, women are marginalized by society and misogyny every day and are told to keep their mouths shut. This is the time to speak. Speak for my mom. Speak for yourself. Those who choose to remain silent are choosing to blind themselves from domestic violence in our homes. My mother tried to leave my father and lost her life." Her father, Brad, has been locked up in a Texas jail since October 9th, just 3 days after Suzanne went missing. But a month after his arrest, officials have charged Brad with murder. Very few details have been released at this time, as a judge sealed his warrant until December 7th. I want to thank Upside for sponsoring today's Law&Crime YouTube takeover. Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. And yes, this is actual real cash back too. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. And it's truly so simple and easy to use. Once you have the Upside app, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or a credit card and follow the steps on the app and get paid. To find out how much you could earn and to see if you can get cash back at your favorite spot, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LC Takeover and get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Again, that's promo code LC Takeover for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. According to a report by KNS5, Brad's family, who have previously slammed the father of four's lack of cooperation in the investigation, called the development heartbreaking. Brad's brother told the outlet in part, quote, "This also helps us come to terms with the reality that Suzanne is no longer with us, allowing us to begin a difficult grieving process and focus on rebuilding our lives, especially for the sake of the children and our extended family." Not only does Brad face a murder charge, he still faces charges of assault of a family member causing bodily injury for the October 6th incident with his wife, as well as charges of possession of a prohibited weapon and tampering/fabricating evidence. The tampering charge stems from Brad asking his friend to stash an AK-47 for him. According to court documents, Brad allegedly texted his longtime friend and business partner, James Cotter, a day after his wife disappeared, asking him to hide an AK-47. Brad allegedly texted Cotter, "If you're in Bandera, can you haul to meet me at your house? I don't have much time." According to police, Cotter agreed to hide the weapon at his San Antonio home, but not in a gun safe, instead in the wall of his home. ATF searched Cotter's home, and the K-9 team helped locate where exactly the AK-47 was, and it was retrieved out of the void in the wall. It's unclear at this time if Cotter will face additional charges in light of Brad being charged with murder. This week, a judge significantly reduced Cotter's bond from $1 million to $100,000. And prosecutors agreed with Cotter's attorney to the bond modification, which includes Cotter can have no contact with Brad Simpson, he can't possess a firearm, and if he posts bond, he must wear a GPS tracking device. And Cotter still waits indictment. Meanwhile, Brad has previously denied his involvement in his wife's disappearance through his attorney. According to a report by the San Antonio Express, Brad's lawyer previously said the neighbor wasn't credible, and it's ludicrous that Brad is being held on a $2 million bond for misdemeanor charges. His attorney at the time said, quote, "They're not going to even file these cases, and they don't want to file these cases because if they file these cases, then all of his rights kick in. As long as these cases are unfiled, we can't urge a speedy trial." But for now, Brad Simpson and James Cotter remain behind bars, and now another mystery still looms over the case, and that's finding Suzanne Simpson's body. A lot to unpack with this shocking new development. So let's bring on criminal defense attorney Florina Al Shiler. Florina, it's always great to see you, and thank you so much for joining me. What's your reaction to Brad Simpson being charged with murder, especially now that it's been more than a month since Suzanne Simpson first went missing?
I'm not entirely surprised. The motive is there based on a strong history of domestic violence, which is unfortunately common to see. I do think there's going to be some difficulty with prosecuting the homicide, given that there is no body. Body has not been recovered, and they have to establish that she is deceased. And one of the best ways to establish that she's deceased is by having a dead body.
And yeah, speaking about that, like in terms of prosecuting or even defending a murder case, what type of uphill battles could both sides be facing? So we have the prosecution with no body, so they're kind of relying a lot on circumstantial evidence. Does that make it easier for the defense going forward in the case?
Voluntarily disappearing is not a crime. And one of the best defenses to a no body homicide is a voluntary disappearance. So the defense can easily argue to raise reasonable doubt that she left of her own volition. I expect that the prosecution is going to put forward a history of domestic violence. And while that is a great motive for murder, it also feeds into a potential defense of her voluntarily leaving, given that there was a history of domestic violence and that maybe she wanted to disappear to escape that relationship. However, in 2024, with technology being what it is, we're not just talking about bank records that would exist, right? Somebody doesn't just leave and disappear and doesn't need money. They're using ATMs, they're using bank accounts, they need to live. But we're talking about data points that people are leaving digitally in our modern age. So we would expect somebody, even if they tried to disappear, that they're going to be either checking social media or email or leaving digital footprints, cell phones. And when all of that suddenly disappears, the anchor point of the person's life is gone. Outside of joining a witness protection program, chances are pretty strong that they're dead. And that would be a very reasonable conclusion given the history of this marriage, given what her children are saying about the domestic violence, and given that the neighbor is saying that on the day of her disappearance, that person saw the two of them fighting. She was going down to the ground and she was screaming. That's going to be really strong evidence for the prosecution to suggest, even without a body, that she's likely dead.
And given that, right before Brad, or we learned that Brad was charged with murder, he and Suzanne's daughter did post on Instagram saying she believed her father killed her mom because she was going to leave him and he did this out of rage. What do you make of his daughter saying that? And how important could what the children may have seen or heard or witnessed be in the prosecution's case?
So the 20-year-old daughter's conclusion that her father killed her mother is not something that's necessarily going to come in as evidence because it's speculation. She's guessing. She didn't observe this. However, her observations of a history of domestic violence, that is going to be key. Anything she witnessed between her parents, anytime her father hit her mother, yelled at her mother, shoved her mother, whatever that domestic violence history is, that is going to be pivotal to establish his motive to kill her. And unfortunately, as is common, children are often the key witnesses to testify to this devastating history between the couple.
And a couple weeks ago, Brad's business associate and longtime friend was charged with tampering with evidence. I guess according to authorities, he had hid an AK-47 to help Brad during this case. And a judge just reduced his bond. But in light of Brad being charged with murder, is it possible his friend, James Cotter, could also face more charges?
It really depends on the facts and it depends on how involved his friend was. Now, if this weapon is a weapon that's suspected to have been used in the homicide, that really takes things to a different level. But it's going to be almost impossible to establish what weapon, if any, was used when you don't have a cause of death because you don't have a body. And the body would be the best way to establish it, right? Is there a bullet in the body? Are there stab wounds? Is there evidence of suffocation? What was the cause of death? That is going to be an unanswerable question here. And so hiding a weapon that may be related to this homicide or maybe completely not related isn't really going to answer that question unless and until we know more facts. However, depending on how involved his friend was, he could potentially be charged for the same homicide without having had committed it under a theory of conspiracy if they were acting together. And that question can only be answered when we know more facts.
And with that warrant still sealed up until I believe next month, I guess we'll kind of have to wait and see how this all will continue to play out. Florina, I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. Before we sign you off, is there anything else about this case that you would like to add?
I will say that a lot of times people think, well, I'm going to get rid of the body, completely destroy this body, and nobody will ever find it. And if they don't have a body, they can't prove that the person died, so they can't get me for murder. Wrong. The percentage rate of convictions across the country for homicides with no bodies recovered is shockingly higher than the percentage rate of convictions where the body is recovered. And there's other issues with evidence. So, even though, of course, a key element of the crime is that the victim is dead, there is circumstantial evidence that can establish that the victim died, that the defendant is the person who murdered that victim, the approximate time of the death, the location of the death. All of that can be established circumstantially without ever recovering a body. So, whoever out there is listening that is demented and is thinking about murder and thinking about getting rid of the body and thinking that this is a foolproof plan to get away with murder, wrong. They will find you, they will prosecute you, and they will convict you. A body is not a requirement to a successful homicide prosecution.
All right, Florina, great insight and excellent insight as always. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Brad Simpson's bond for the murder charge was set at $2 million, bringing his total bond from all of his charges to $5 million. And at this time, he remains behind bars in the Bexar County Jail. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.